All right. Well, how's that for a start to NFL free agency here on Monday, March 11th? Off and running
Whew.
already. Tons of news. Tons of news. We're going to talk about a lot of that. And we're going to talk as well about the process of free agency, which is what brings us to this episode here today. Very excited to have a current colleague of mine, but former longtime NFL scout for the Denver Broncos, Chris Trulove, here with us today to talk about his experience, what the scouting departments, what teams and franchises are doing around this time of the year, and all of the work, of course, the months, years, even long of work that leads up to weeks like this. So really excited for it. Mark, you got any thoughts on what you're looking most forward to here for this one?
Yeah, can't wait to dive in, kind of peel back the curtain for our listeners and fans, like, just that relationship between the front office and the players and how all of these, things kind of come together. It's going to be a great opportunity for us to speak with Chris. And honestly, the amount of breaking news during this tampering period, the NFL has hit a home run with this tampering period window where they let these contracts kind of leak, and they are totally dominating the news here in the middle of March. That's what the NFL does.
Yeah, NFL does a year long, but of course, during these specific periods of time, they absolutely are dominating those headlines. So looking forward to it. Without further ado, let's get to our interview with Chris Trulove. All right. You see him on your screen there, Mr. Chris Trulove. Appreciate you being here with us. Longtime NFL scout. 1994 to 2010, you were part of the scouting department there for the Denver Broncos, wearing numerous hats in the process. And those final 4 years running the pro scouting department. So, first off, Chris, obviously we could talk about a lot of different things. Free agency has started today officially, and the deals can't be made official until Wednesday, but we all know kind of what's coming up. But obviously, we could dive in a lot of different areas. I think it's probably best to just start right off the top. Tell us about how you got into scouting and the route that you took over those 16 years in the league, to make a full-fledged career out of it. Because I know for a lot of scouts, it's tough to get started early on, and it's a grind. So yeah, walk me through that process.
Yeah, I think mine was probably a little unique, but I do know of other people that have had a similar story. But basically, I was in the process of getting my master's degree at the University of Georgia in sports management. And to get the internship, or to finish the internship, which was the capstone of the degree, I landed a marketing internship at the Denver Broncos. And I was willing to move across country to do it. So I did that. And within 2 days of walking the halls in the Broncos organization, the general manager stopped my boss, the marketing director, and myself in the hallway. And he basically was talking directly to me, saying, "Chris, do you have your driver's license?" "Yes, I have my driver's license." "Yeah, can you drive to the liquor store and buy booze for the scouts during training camp?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I can, but Rosemary's my boss right here." He goes, "Well, Chris, can you run a computer? We're about to give computers to our scouts. They've never used one before. Can you run a computer?" Like, "Yeah, I can turn on my computer and turn it off and type things and read things and occasional email. Yeah, that's somewhat new." But my boss is Rosemary. She's standing right here. He goes, "Rosemary, do you mind if we borrow him a couple hours a day?" And she looks at me, and I look at her, and I'm like, "Yes, please." She says, "Sure. Yeah, you can have him a couple hours a day." So sure enough, you can probably fill in the rest. But 2 hours a day, the last 2 hours a day turned into 3 hours a day, turned into 4 hours a day, turned into those scouts relying on me for their scouting reports and me loving every minute of everything they talked about. And after 6 months or so, it was basically Christmas time, and the organization called me. I had gone home for Christmas. No one does that in the NFL, but I was an intern, so I could do it. They called me and said, when you come back after Christmas, we want to offer you a job, full-time job, but we need you to make a decision. Do you want to do sports marketing, or do you want to be a personnel scouting assistant? And I was going to say I thought long and hard, but I didn't think very long. I did think hard. I have a degree, undergraduate degree in marketing. I have a master's degree in sports management with an emphasis in marketing. I came here on a marketing internship. It's stable. Sports marketing department is budding. It's new. It's going to be stable, and they'll probably pay me a decent amount, normal marketing job, corporate marketing job. Or I can spend my time with these old farts and keep them organized and whatever. I don't know a whole lot about college football in terms of playing the game. I wasn't a college football player. And they're getting ready to fire the head coach, Wade Phillips. So what does that mean to the general manager and all the scouts? Damn, I don't know the answer to any of these questions. But you only live once. So I'll take the job and I'll come work for the scouts. So that's how it started. And then they put me in a corner office with Jack Elway, of all people, John Elway's father, who at the time was the director of pro scouting. And he was getting old and sleepy and and basically kind of losing interest in working a full-time gig. But he had wisdom seeping through every pore. And so they wanted me to keep him awake, keep him motivated, keep him organized, get the information out of his head to the rest of the organization as it comes to free agency and quarterbacks. And that's what we did. That's what we did for the next 7 years. He was my mentor, and I learned everything about scouting and became a pro scout, and then stayed there forever.
The rest is
Chris,
history.
it's fascinating start. And one of the things that I think that leads us into is this idea that when you got your start there in the early 90s, and obviously at the transition for the Broncos, but the league just looked so different then. By the time you left the league in 2010, you talk about, we're thinking about giving our guys computers. And even by 2010, analytics starts seeping into the game more and more. Talk a little bit about, maybe it really helped you being a young guy, learning from the old guys and gaining that wisdom, but also being able to transition with the league as it was transitioning, and how different it was in the early 90s versus the late 2000s, and what it is today with, people you still know in the league, of like how that all has changed for people in the front office.
You hit the nail on the head. It couldn't be any more different than, I'd like to think it was just a few years ago, but I'm a little older, and quite frankly, it was nearly 30 years ago at this point. But yeah, totally different. We were just starting to, when I left, analytics were just becoming a real thing. We did it all at that time. Now there's analytics teams within most teams, most organizations. We didn't have that, but we were starting to use analytics a little bit, where we would get data from other sources or maintain our own databases. And we had massive spreadsheets, which we called the grid. The grid, which was not even digital. That's where we kept track of everything, and we graded everything in terms of each individual player that's in the National Football League entering or exiting. Everything was in a massive spreadsheet or database. And now, of course, there's bukus of tools that are used, and AI is even a part of it, I'm sure. But it was a different time for sure. But if I could just get on my horse for just a minute, my high horse, or my
please.
It takes humans. It takes knowledge of the game. It takes analytics. It takes young people with energy. It takes the old farts with all the historical information and the beauty of perspective. It takes all of it to get this right in the National Football League, because at the end of the day, there are humans playing the game.
Yeah, there's just aspects of football that you can't boil down to a spreadsheet, as you talked about it, or a grid, right? It's there's a lot of nuance to a lot of these players and teams. So we had mentioned that you started back in '94. You're talking about Wade Phillips on his way out. In comes Mike Shanahan in
Yeah.
1995. You're obviously there during the Shanahan era, which produced Super Bowl championships and obviously was a really fruitful time for the Denver Broncos in general. Um, Tell me about Mike Shanahan, and then obviously we can get to Kyle as well because he's, the
Mm-hmm.
one of the most highly touted head coaches that are around right now. But what were your impressions of Mike Shanahan when he first came in, and what was it like, to work with him, and what is
Yeah.
that relationship like between a scout and the head coach in the front office and all of that?
Yeah. Man, memories. Terrific. Thanks for having me on the show, first off.
Absolutely.
Wade was on his way out, and the organization introduced to us internally before it got to the media that Mike Shanahan, a former Broncos coach and 49ers coach, is coming to be our head coach. And he will bring organization like we've never seen before. So I remember going over to the team facilities back then were not what they are today. So in order for us to hear from Mike Shanahan, just us internal workers, to hear from our new leader who's going to have full control day one of coaching and scouting personnel, we had to go over to this crappy Holiday Inn hotel by Centennial Airport so that we could find a room big enough for all of us. And we go in the room and they set up a podium up front for Mike to address all of us as staff members. And within 5 minutes, everyone is starting to get goosebumps.
Wow.
Everyone realizes this man knows this league. This man knows how to coach players, how to run an organization, and more than anything, he's fired up and expects perfection from the rest of us. And that's what everybody needed to hear. We needed to hear that we matter and we are going to bring perfection. And from day one, that one meeting, that's how my life was working with Mike Shanahan for the rest of the time. It was basically the man knows and expects perfection. I think we all know that, sometimes that breeds an environment that's difficult and it's not fun and it's long hours and it's a lot of lectures or sitting in the principal's office, so to speak. I spent a lot of time in the principal's office. So did my coworker that did this and my coworker that did that. We spent a lot of time in the principal's office, sitting right across his big desk, trying to build perfection. And that's a nutshell of working for Mike Shanahan. Is just that he has a vision for what it looks like. Everyone has a role of their piece of the perfection, and if it's not perfect, keep working. Go back to your office and get after it. And a lot of really successful coaches and teams are built that way. Some others, I will say this, where I think he was special is that he was able to do that in demand perfection in difficult times. And sometimes it's not fun, but at the end of the day, we're winning and we're getting rewarded for it. And at the end of the year, when it's time for your new contract, or after 3 years or 2 years or however long the scouting contracts are, at the end of the day, you go to the principal's office and you find out how you did, and you find out if you get a new contract. And so for every 2 or 3 years, and I was there 17, when I went to the principal's office for my new contract, that's when he would say, "Good job. Here's your new contract." Just amazing. I didn't even touch on Kyle, but Kyle was a little guy back then, and he was around all the time. And, we knew if he wanted to, of course, he was encouraged just to live his life at that point and become a high school player and a college player and all that. But it was very apparent that if he wanted to someday get in the business and become a coach, that he was going to have everything at his fingertips. And if he had the work ethic of his father, he would be successful.
Yeah.
So happy to see.
Yeah. I mean, he's really becoming such an incredible asset to the league and carrying on the Shanahan legacy as well. Chris, I want to go back to that in the early 90s. So much in NFL history for guys like Dan and I, we're in our early 30s. So we didn't live through it, but you now hear the historians talk about, what Jimmy Johnson, the Cowboys did in the early 90s kind of changed the league, where he created this kind of chart for trades and like what was the value of a player. And so nowadays, on a day like today in free agency, and you're already talking about T. Higgins saying, "Hey, I want a trade request."
Yeah.
When you're in the office, in the early 90s, and then it gets into the early 2000s, and how did it change? How did it morph your involvement when a GM, would get a trade request, or you're looking at possibly adding someone during free agency? The values on players and how you're determining, hey, this guy we think is worth a second rounder, or hey, we think this guy is worth that $30 million a year guaranteed. And does the GM come to you and say, prove to me why you think he actually is worth $30 million a year? What are those conversations like? And how did that change also from the early 90s when trades weren't a real thing? It wasn't a big, until Jimmy Johnson really kind of opened the floodgates for it, versus now where guys are being traded willy-nilly just because he, unfollows something on Instagram and it's like, well, now I want out. And how different that was during your time period.
Completely different. While as a pro scout or a pro personnel coordinator, director, whatever that role looks like for someone back then, it was not like that at all. It was not like that at all. Players did not dictate anything. No, not at all. So we did have trades, right? But few and far between compared to what it is like today. And it was mainly around draft time, and it was around draft picks. That was the motivation at the time. It was never about unhappy players. Players are unhappy. I mean, if you're going to get traded, then the organization was unhappy, but not players. And if anything, back then, because trading wasn't as prevalent, you're more likely to see a guy just flat out get cut if he said he was unhappy. Because if he's unhappy, he's a cancer in the locker room, whether he is or not. Chances are he could be. And players are more likely to get cut than traded. Of course, there's a lot more involved in all of that today with salary cap ramifications and stuff. We had that then, of course, but way more scientific today and way more volatile today, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces with free agency, and now we're seeing the frenzy of like every minute or so, new news comes out about who's going where, and the interesting thing, Chris, to kind of touch on what Mark's question was, there is, free agency was relatively new when you had come to start, so like I'm sure that the league itself was trying to figure out how to handle free agency in general, because the players probably didn't know what they could leverage, and teams maybe were still trying to figure out and grease those wheels themselves and trying to gauge on what this is going to look like moving forward, because for so many years they controlled every aspect of it.
You bring up a terrific point. And quite frankly, because of that, because it was new, and because the league didn't have all of the rules in place that they have today, they hadn't had time to figure it all out. There were rules, of course, but the Broncos I came at the perfect time. And was inserted into pro scouting. I didn't choose pro scouting. I just wanted to help the scouts. And I had lots of college scouting projects on the side, but I was assigned to Mr. Elway in pro scouting and free agency. And at that time, we were at the cutting edge because Shanahan and some of his people he worked with came from the 49ers organization, who were very crafty with contracts and the new salary cap. we were actually at the cutting edge of getting, understanding the rules that are in place and the rules that are not in place.
Yeah.
Yep.
And thereby getting big name free agents and paying for it later instead of today. And that's how we built our roster in the 97-98 Super Bowl seasons. A lot of big name free agents, some good draft picks, of course. And of course, Elway, the quarterback, you have to have that. But that's how we did it. That's how in the 90s we had our success on the footsteps of the Cowboys, was through free agency. And I was lucky to be a part of it. It was awesome.
Yeah, Chris, when you talk about building a team through free agency versus building through a draft, one of the greatest coaches, probably the greatest coach of all time, Bill Belichick, historically now you look back on these last couple of years and it's like, well, one of the big problems with the Patriots was they just can't get the draft right. They can't find talent in the draft. He could always find some guy who was hidden on someone's roster on a practice squad and see that talent when it's in the NFL level versus at the college level. Go back and talk a little bit about in your career in those moments in the room where it's like, hey, what's the difference between that unproven commodity with the draft pick versus we know this, we've seen this, and we can use this directly. And those conversations with the GM and the ownership group, maybe it was the coach, like how many people are involved, or is it, hey, I just turned in my scouting report and now it's totally up to you?
Oh, wow. Yeah. You just summed that question up really nice at the end for me. Man, it is not, here's a scouting report, now go, my hands are done.
Yeah.
At least it wasn't when I was there. I do know that there are some organizations, maybe I shouldn't name any, that don't do it that way. They want their scouts just to submit their reports, and that's all they need from them. That's all they want. That was not the way the Broncos did it. That was not the way the winning Broncos did it. There've been some times where I've heard the Broncos have changed from that family atmosphere where scouts and coaches are all on the same team and working together all the time. I mean, we knew players' wives and their kids, and it was definitely a big giant family when I was there. But back to the point, what that looked like was always on. It was always on. The scouts need to always have an opinion. Yes, they have scouting reports that need to be up to date. And yes, they need to be right and accurate. Absolutely. But at the same time, there are so many review meetings with the coaches, and particularly, and maybe that's because the head coach was in charge of personnel, but so many meetings regularly with the coaching staff or just the head coach and the general manager underneath him, whereby we were reviewing everything. A lot of times, the scouting report starts with an evaluation of the way the guy plays on the field, because we all know the coaches don't have time for that. They say they do. They don't. That's where the scouts come in, watching film all the time. So the scouts know how they play on the field. But what also comes into play is that every player who's a human being is either getting better or getting worse. And every player who is a human being is being affected by their environment around them, whether it's the coaches they're currently playing for or the coaches they would someday play for at the new organization. Or is this their first big contract, or is this their second contract? Do they already have a family? Do they already have a wife and kids responsibilities? What does that look like? Because one guy going after his first contract and he's single is going to look different than a guy who's got a family he's got to move around the country. So all of those free agent meetings are going on starting, I'll never forget, story. We won the second Super Bowl, and actually I'll take it back before that, better part of it. Before the 97 Super Bowl where the Broncos beat the Green Bay Packers, the previous playoff season, it was Jacksonville Jaguars. We
Oh,
were
yeah.
1 seed. Jacksonville came into our place and beat us. And it crushed everyone. I remember finding the head coach in the locker room because I ran free agent meetings for our organization. The leaders were making the decisions, but I was running the meetings. And I found the head coach because I knew his personality. As soon as we lost that game, he's off to winning the Super Bowl next year. He's like, forget this, no sob stories. How are we winning next year? And I found him in the locker room, and I was terrified he was going to rip my head off. And I said, Coach, I'm assuming you're ready to start free agent meetings tomorrow. And he's like, yep.
Wow.
Like, Coach, I'll get it all ready for tomorrow. And he said, yes, please do that. I don't know if he said please. I don't know. Anyway, he didn't rip my head off. And yes, get free agent meetings ready tomorrow. And we started the next day, and we talked about all of that stuff, not just how they play, but their families. What does it look like? Are they going to get along with our offensive line coach, Alex Gibbs, or not? Are they going to get along with so-and-so who's our outgoing I love the guy, Shannon Sharp. Are they going to get along with Shannon Sharp or not? Well, Bill Romanowski may not get along with Shannon Sharp, but he's good enough that let's try it. All of that. It's just nonstop. It's nonstop.
Wow.
You never stop.
A lot of moving pieces to deciding those fits, and then scheme fit obviously I'm sure factors into there as well.
100%.
With a lot of these players. No, yeah, it's a very nuanced and tedious job. That's why there are plenty of full-time jobs in those departments throughout the league. So I'm curious, kind of going off of these discussions, what do you think is the biggest misconception that the general public has about free agency? Is it, a lot of fan bases want their teams to sign all of the best free agents. Obviously, that's not realistic from a salary cap perspective, not realistic for scheme fit and things like that. Is there anything you noticed, and even during your career and since then, that the general public just gets completely wrong about how free agency works and is just completely unrealistic about their expectations for their favorite teams as well?
Yeah, totally, 100%. And it goes off of what we were just talking about a minute ago, is that it's so easy for us as fans, because I'm a fan now, to look at players as commodities. And that just because they did something in Seattle, for example, to use a current reference, just because they've had a wonderful career in Seattle doesn't mean they're going to have a wonderful, amazing career day one in Denver. Don't count your chickens before they hatch. Yes, free agency can be dangerous. Can be really dangerous. That doesn't mean it's bad. That doesn't mean it's evil. That doesn't mean you can't do it. You can, but you need to understand all the nuances of obviously the salary cap and all of that and the contract. Here's a piece that I think fans don't often think about. There are decisions made to sign or not sign free agents based upon who's the agent.
Ooh.
Right. Yeah.
Who is the agent? Is this an agent that we have a great relationship with? And he trusts us, we trust them, and can we get a deal done that makes sense? Is this an agent where we've had a bad relationship and he's just out for the dollar and he'll hurt his own player just to get top dollar? Those things mean quite a bit. And that oftentimes get lost in the excitement of free agency and can affect whether a player gets signed or not, quite frankly.
Chris, you were lucky for a large part of your career at Denver, obviously having John Elway. And one of the famous things is, Denver's gone through it a little bit here now, again, after losing Peyton Manning. It's like this kind of, where do we go? What do we do? Do we immediately go for a rookie? Do we try to bring in a veteran? We just got the breaking news from Adam Schefter during this interview that the Falcons have signed Kirk Cousins to a 4-year deal, by the way. So breaking news. So I wanted to, this is kind of all leads into this question is, if you're on a team, you know, and you're in those moments where it's the biggest question mark, right? And you're saying to yourself, man, what are we going to do here? If you're, you know, in charge of pro scouting, and you're saying to yourself, and you're with the Falcons right now, and you're saying to yourself, to the GM, to the head coach, here's why I believe in a guy like Kirk Cousins. Here's why I'm going to stand on the table for him. And you got your director of, you know, of draft, you know, college scouting coming in saying, no. we JJ McCarthy is the guy. He's going to be there at number 8. Talk us through some of those conversations, like when you went through in Denver post Elway. Like, how does that work? How does the guy, the pro scout director, win in Atlanta today, saying, "Hey, we got Kirk Cousins because of my recommendation." Injuries, you know, he's coming off the Achilles. What are the nuances of those conversations in your experience, or what you could imagine they would look like if you were in Atlanta today?
Yeah. First off, in Atlanta today, they're celebrating. They're celebrating. There's that, and that's real. The celebration's real. The director of college scouting might be celebrating a little less, but he's not complaining. He gets it. He understands. So yeah, internally, he's probably feeling a little less excited than the pro department. However, to get to the bottom of it, this is where you need a general manager, whether it's a general manager or the head coach that has final say, whoever it is that has the final say, that person and or couple of people that trust each other, they need to be meeting with the pro scouts on free agency separately than meeting with the college staff on college players. And there needs to be cross meetings so that the pro guys understand what the draft class looks like, and the draft guys understand what free agents are out there. So everybody understands the landscape. But in terms of the final decisions leading into the draft or the free agency period, that GM and his salary cap guy and his trusted advisors, they have to decide. I mean, it can't be, that's it. And they have to be good and accurate. And a lot of head coaches who have final say, they're not good at it.
Yeah.
They're not good at it.
Yep. It actually kind of sounds to me like almost like what police officers do when they first get to a scene. Separate the three people involved. We're going to get the individual stories and make our assessment based on this, rather than everybody kind of maybe together and trying to, you know, give their best versions of their own you know, takes, knowing what the other side is saying and things like that. That's just funny comparison that jumped in my head right there.
What's interesting to the question is that you're bringing back memories. This is amazing. Yeah, when we've in the past, when we've made some big free agent signings or whatever, the college scouts will come find you in the room and they're like, "Why did we do that? Why did we sign that free agent guy? I mean, is he any good?" Like, because they don't spend a lot of time evaluating the film. They see the games on TV and so on and so forth. So yeah, it is fascinating to the pro guys and the college guys to talk about their visions of what the team looks like and the future looks like. And sometimes they are not congruent. But that's where the ultimate say from the top leaders needs to be fully informed.
Really appreciate your time, Chris. This has been awesome. Like, really excited to have you on here, and we'll be respectful of your time and get going here shortly. But before we go, I do want to ask you about Terrell Davis, because I read that he was your first scouting report, which what a doozy that is to get things off and running. So I want to hear about that, your story about Terrell Davis, and then also, is there a player over your years of doing pro scouting that really is a sense of pride for you? Like, wow, we really like hit on that guy, and maybe he wasn't the most highly sought after, or maybe he was, but it was just one that you are most proud of as well. But first, we got to start with Terrell Davis because I got to hear about TD.
No, that's cool. That's cool. I love to talk about TD. Let me first just say, his career got cut short. Man, he would be in the Hall of Fame. Is he in the Hall of Fame? He did get in the Hall of Fame.
I think, he's in the Hall of Fame, but it did take some time. It did take some time.
He would have been first ballot, man. He would have been first ballot. So the story is that, as you well know, my career was mostly free agents and trades and advanced scouting the opponents and signals and all that stuff. But especially in my younger days, my earlier days, I did help out with another opinion on guys in the draft, because the hay's in the barn as far as studying the free agents after the season. So we'll switch hats and help the college scouts for a while to make sure draft picks are good. But to take it further back, I was still the intern guy when Terrell was a senior at the University of Georgia. My master's program was the University of Georgia. I had to fly back there to take my oral exams and speak to my class about what it's like to work in the NFL as an intern and da-da-da-da. So I had to go back there. Well, college kid, you're just out of college, you're broke. Well, you don't have any money. In any event, I was going to have enough to fly myself to Georgia to speak to the class and do my oral exams. But a day or two before I was supposed to fly out, the college scouting director called me into his office and he said, "Chris, I hear you're going back to the University of Georgia. Would you be up for writing a few scouting reports, kind of as a test?" And I'm like, a test for what? That sounds good. Test sounds good. He must have something up his sleeve. Sure. Yeah, I'd love to do that. He goes, "Well, we'll do you a deal. We'll pay for your trip and we'll get you a field pass and a press box pass. And we'll give you the list, these 5 guys right here. If you could go there on game day, college game day, Georgia's playing Vanderbilt, if you could just write up these 5 guys, interview coaches on the sideline, introduce yourself, all that, try to get as much information as you can, write them up, and then submit your scouting reports on these guys, and we'll pay for your trip for you." Okay. This is terrific.
Yeah.
So Terrell was one of them. I remember the other guys, which no one else would remember. They didn't. Actually, one guy became a WWF wrestler. His name was Goldberg.
No
if you follow.
Oh, Goldberg!
Oh, wow!
Yeah.
Holy smokes!
Yeah, he was one of them. Regardless,
was he a linebacker in college? What did he play?
He was
He was
offensive
an
lineman.
DN. Oh, he was
lineman. All right. He was a big dude. He was a pretty big guy.
Offensive
Yeah.
lineman. He was moderate player. He chose well.
Good showman. Yeah.
Yeah, he chose well. Anyway, Terrell, I don't know if you remember, and I'm trying to keep this brief, but he didn't play a lot. He came from Long Beach State, which had dropped football. And so he was there. He was nicked up and injured quite a bit. So he was sharing time with other guys. So you just really had to focus on watching him play in the few reps that he's in there. And so he did. And talking to other people, they were like, he's dedicated to the sport. He's just never on the field. He's dedicated to the sport and he wants to be well, so on and so forth. So in any event, I wrote up the scouting report on the little bit of information that I could glean from my own eyeballs and what people were saying. And I was one of many scouts that submitted the scouting report on them, the primary scout, the cross-check, the positional scout, and then me, the in-person scout. And, I said basically what our other scouts said. Not that I was a genius, but I did say 6th rounder, by the way. He was taken in the 6th round.
There you go.
I did say he's worth the flyer in the 6th round, just on ability and desire. And then I'll never forget one of the preseason games we played in Japan at the Egg Bowl. And Terrell, still as an organization, we didn't know if we were going to hit on him or not. at that point. But there was one kickoff coverage, and he came down and just annihilated the ball carrier. And I remember the next day, the head coach, who was the general manager, Mike Shanahan, coming in to us in Jack Elway's office where I was, and the GM was in there too. And he's like, "Did you guys see Terrell?" And we're like, "Yeah, coach, we saw that." And he said, "He might end up being our running back soon." Like, go for it, coach. Sure enough, Terrell Davis. He did it all after that. I mean, it was all.
Yeah, the legend was born.
The legend was born. Terrell Davis, great human being. Oh, he was awesome.
That's great. And any diamonds in the rough that stand out to you from
Oh
your
yeah,
time?
yeah. I have to go to. Sorry, I'm taking advantage of you guys. Honestly.
Oh, hey, no worries.
I have to go with two. The first one was what I would say was kind of a hidden gem. His name was Howard Griffith. He had been a running back at the University of Illinois, stock year running back. He was at the Carolina Panthers at this point, relatively young organization. And he was playing some fullback here and there for them. It was one of my first teams that I was given to evaluate. And I just wrote him up and was like, Broncos, we need to sign this guy to be Terrell's fullback. And we did. We signed him to be Terrell's fullback. And he was terrific fullback during those Super Bowl days and a great human being and just something I've just forever been very, very proud of because not only did it work out on the field, but he was a great leader, a great person in the community, all of that. So that would be the kind of somewhat hidden. And then the other one that I was really proud of, and quite frankly, we should have won. I think we should have won a Super Bowl with before Peyton Manning came to town, and that was Jake Plummer.
Jake the Snake.
Jake the Snake. You know, he was already the Snake and had been in Arizona, but they weren't good. And he deserved a chance to play on a team that was good. And he's the Snake. He's all over the place. You know, making crazy plays like Patrick Mahomes gets awarded for now. Back then it was scorned upon a little bit with the Cardinals. And Jake came in, a quirky dude, different interests. I think he's a professional handball player now or something.
Yeah, and he has like a whole mushroom farm.
He has a mushroom farm.
He's very into mushrooms, Jake the Snake.
Yeah, that is correct. You're absolutely right. But anyway, he's a great teammate. Great teammate. While not as polished as a Peyton Manning or a Tom Brady or whatever, he inspires teammates.
Wow.
And we made it to the AFC Championship at home and lost to Pittsburgh, and it never happened again. But
Yeah. I remember. I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan on the show here. Mark is Chicago Bears all day. It's been a wild off season for the two of us so far, but I do remember that AFC Championship quite well. That was a nerve-wracking trip. I mean, the Broncos were riding high at that point, and it seemed like everything was clicking that year. So I can imagine that was a tough loss, especially because like Pittsburgh was the 6th seed that year. They were the first wild card team to win Super Bowl. So yeah, that's fascinating. Jake Plummer though, yeah, he was a baller. Guy carved out a nice career for himself. That's for sure.
Yes, he did. Yeah, it's good to see.
Chris, this has been absolutely a pleasure. We'll have to get you back on at some point so I can just spend about 30 minutes asking you about Jay Cutler.
Yeah, seriously.
And a bunch of other stuff, but we appreciate you. We appreciate you giving us time today and kind of starting this relationship here with us on the Football Lounge. And I have a feeling we'll get more stories from you, more insight in the future for sure.
I love to talk about it. I love to talk. It's a part of my life I don't get to touch very often anymore. And you guys obviously do a tremendous job just watching today how you act with me and then other episodes I've seen. So I welcome the opportunity.
Great.
Appreciate it. Always welcome here on the show, Chris. Chris Trulove, former NFL scout, 17 years with the Denver Broncos. Thanks so much, and we'll be seeing you again sometime soon, I'm sure.
All right, guys. Good luck out there.
See you, Chris.
Take care. All right, that was
awesome.
That was awesome. I did really really been wanting to get Chris on the show here and talk about his experience and everything like that. But yeah, Terrell Davis, obviously the Super Bowl championships, the Shanahans. There's a lot of football history being intersected there with his career.
Well, and he had such a I wanted to make sure, and I'm glad we got to touch on it. Like starting in the early 90s versus the leaving in 2010. Talk about such a different era of football. Like, I mean, like he joked, like one of his favorites was finding a fullback. People nowadays are like, you got our teenage listeners are like, what's a fullback? Right. And so that really interesting stuff. And we definitely should have him on again, maybe later this offseason or at some point in time during the season next year as well, like around the trade deadline, just to talk about what maybe some of those teams and those conversations are like. Because I thought that was great insight too. I wanted to check, we're recording this on March 11th in the middle of it. And I just I got a feeling I should check Schefter. And I saw it. And the first thing you see is Kirk Cousins getting traded. Signing with the Falcons, and him knowing immediately like, oh yeah, no, they're celebrating like in the pro scouts and how they go about, making their case versus the college scouts making their case for what an organization should do. It's really fascinating stuff.
It really is. It's awesome. Glad we got Chris on, and to your point, we'll definitely have to get him on here on the show again for sure, just to talk more. And I am curious to hear about Jay Cutler, that's for sure. For those listening, we are going to have a separate episode here, so go back to the YouTube channel, check it out. We're going to talk about all things free agency because it's been a wild Monday here in the NFL. Russell Wilson, T. Higgins, Kirk Cousins now, of course, Chris Jones, tons of different players getting ready to ink deals with respective teams throughout the league. So be sure to tune for that. But that will do it for our special interview segment here on the Football Lounge. We appreciate having you here, and we'll see you back here for the free agency recap.